Well, hey everyone, Pastor Mark here, and we are so happy that you're able to join us. I don't know if it's just my innate urge that I have to grumble all the time and that's coming through, or if it's really been uncharacteristically cold this last month. I think that it has. But regardless, I pray that your homes right now are filled with warmth, both literal and spiritual. Just before we hear today's message, I want to highlight a few things with you guys. The current provincial restrictions have been extended until February 14th, and we're going to continue to keep you updated as that moves along. Reminder too, that Pastor Mitchell's Bible study series called The Good Fight is happening every Wednesday. New video drops on YouTube every single Wednesday. And I encourage you to look into that. For student ministries, Anchored Youth, grades 6 and up, we're having meetings on Monday nights and Thursday nights virtually through Zoom. As well, for our Voyager programs, anyone from the ages of 3 to grade 5, we're doing weekly updated video Voyagers, and we're updating that every single Monday. The easiest way to check those out or to find out any information about what's going on with the youth groups is to follow the Student Ministries group, APBC Student Ministries. You can search that on Facebook. And just a reminder as well, the best way to keep up to date is by following our church Facebook page. And now, as we get ready to hear from God's Word and worshiping Him, it's my prayer that you will be edified, encouraged, and inspired today as you press on in your faith journey. God bless everyone.
Call for songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mount I'm fixed upon it, mount of thy redeeming love. Jesus sought me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God. He to rescue me from danger, interposed His precious blood. Oh, to grace, how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy goodness like a fetter bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it for thy courts above. For that day when, freed from sinning, I shall see thy lovely face. Woven in blood, washed linen, how I'll sing thy sovereign grace. Come, my Lord, no longer tarry, take my ransom soul away. Send thine angels now to carry me to rounds of endless day.
Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart, not be all else to me, save that thou art. Thou my best Lord, by day or by night, waking or sleeping, my presence, my light.
Be thou my wisdom, and thou my true word. I ever with thee, and thou with me, Lord. Thou my great Father, and I thy true Son. Thou in me dwelling, and I with thee one.
Riches I heed not, nor man's empty praise. Thou mine inheritance, now and always. Thou and thou only, be first in my heart. High King of heaven, my treasure thou art. High King of heaven, my victory won. May I reach heaven's joys, oh bright heaven's sun. Heart of my own heart, whatever befall, still be my vision, O ruler of all.
A couple Christmases ago, we bought Ryan a Nintendo Wii game console. Now, for all you gamers out there, I know that's old school, that's retro. We have not upgraded to anything newer in our house, and we're happy with that. We're fine with that. But the thing about the Wii that we bought for Ryan is that it came with a game which at the time was the new Super Mario Brothers. And the beauty of that game is that all four of us can play it together at the same time. And so it's become this bit of a family thing that we do off and on. And so off and on through the last year, what we've done is as a family, we've started out to go through every level in each world until we get to the end and finally beat the game. That's been the goal all along, to rescue Princess Peach from Bowser. And so we started out in World 1, and each level along the way, there were things that you needed to do until finally this Christmas, a whole year later, we got to the end of World 8, to the final castle where the final battle happens, and the kids were pumped and we were excited. We were finally going to beat this game and it would be, completed. And we got to the end of that final battle with Bowser, and we defeated Bowser and he fell into the pit of lava, and we thought we'd rescued Princess Peach, only to discover that it wasn't really her. And Bowser came back, and there was a whole other part of the castle that we still had to complete in order to beat the game. And so finally we were able to do that, and we got to the end, and Princess Peach was rescued, and the kids were awestruck, and it was this amazing moment. And then we got news from the game itself that, have you heard there is a whole other secret world? There was a whole world 9 that we had unlocked through what we had accomplished. And so the kids wanted to go play this world on all its levels. But what we discovered is that in order to play each level, you had to go back through the whole game. And in each level of every world, there were 3 gold coins you had to collect in order to unlock those levels in world 9. And so guess what we started doing at Christmas? We've gone back and we've started through playing the whole game again to get all these coins so that we can unlock the levels in World 9 and keep playing. You know, it seemed like for us in a moment there was this finish line that we had crossed, only to discover that Bowser was still at it and there was more to do. And then when we defeated him in the end, finally we discovered there was a whole other piece for us to tackle. We had thought we crossed the finish line only to discover that there was still more to do. And I don't know about you in your life if you've ever felt like that. Maybe it was in a game or in something else, but you thought that the finish line was there and you were so close to crossing it, or you did cross it, only to discover there was still more. Maybe for you, whether it's your work or your project that you're giving yourself to, or some nonprofit you're serving, or some goals that you have, and when you look at the mountain of work in front of you that needs to be accomplished to get to the finish line, it's like you can't even see the finish line right now because there's so much still to be done. Or maybe for some of you, you've come to a place where you were close to the finish line and somebody told you you had to go back and redo some of the work that you had previously done because it wasn't up to snuff and you weren't going to be able to cross the finish line until it got completed properly. Or maybe you got really close to the finish line and then somebody moved it and there was more to do. Or maybe, just maybe, you crossed the finish line and there was a celebration, the target got hit, the goal was accomplished, and then you realized that there was another finish line to be crossed, and there was going to be even more after that. And what you thought was the end was actually the start of something new again. When it comes to our lives and work, for so many of us, we feel like the work that we do, the finish line either is not in sight or gets moved constantly, or when we crossed it, we just discovered that there was still more work to do. And so you went and you punched in and you hit the targets and you accomplished the goals, and your company or you yourself or the project you're a part of, you did everything you could to work toward completing it. You built a whole career even out of this one industry or your part in it, or of serving this company or working for this person, and your whole life you gave so much of your life to working in this specific area or industry, only to at the end of it retire. And maybe you retired from your job, or you retired from the company, or maybe you've stepped away from different companies throughout your life, but whatever it might be, maybe you even owned the business and it came the time for you to actually give it up, or somebody even maybe took it from you in the end. We come to the end of our working lives and the thing that we've given our lives to, and eventually what we discover is that if that company still continues, someone else is going to take your place. Or if it's your business, somebody's going to take it over, or you're going to sell out. Whatever it might be, eventually you will be removed from your work. Which kind of begs the question, doesn't it? Like, what do we gain from all of our working life? Whether it's working for the company or owning our own business, or the work that we do by staying at home and raising kids, whether it's the project that we are trying so hard to complete for somebody, whatever it might be, what do we gain from all of our work? And I don't mean that to be kind of a downer of a question. I think it's a really important question, and one that requires us to give some careful thought to. In fact, it is the very question that the teacher or the preacher explores next in the book of Ecclesiastes. But before he jumps into an exploration of that question and of that theme, he circles back around the idea of wisdom and folly. And that conversation about wisdom and folly is one that gets leveraged toward discerning an answer, or at least some thoughts about the work that we do and whether we can find meaning, purpose, and significance in it. And so he begins in chapter 2, verse 12, and the teacher says, "So I turn to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can a man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done." In other words, I look to wisdom and folly, and again, this is a consistent theme that gets revisited throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. I considered wisdom and folly in succession, and what about the person who comes after the king, or after the boss, or who fills your job and your role in the company? What about the person who comes after you, the person who's new to take over, who does the same work as you? What can they do except they are rolling into that position and that role in order to accomplish the tasks that you have given so much of your life to? And he says this about wisdom and folly. He says, "Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than folly, there is more gain in light than darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceive that the same event happens to them all." And so he says, look, he freely admits, look, wisdom is better than folly. There is an advantage to it in the same way that light is advantageous over darkness. He draws this parallel imagery that seeing clearly through life is better than walking in darkness, that having wisdom is better than actually living in foolishness. There is an advantage to wisdom. It is a better alternative. But then he says, I perceived something. I saw something that was true, that kind of goes beyond the what's right in front of me. I had an insight into the bigger picture, and here's what I discovered. He says the same event happens to both the wise person and the foolish person. There is something similar. With all the differences, there's something similar and consistent between the wise and the fool, or with the wise and the fool. And here's what he goes on to say in verse 15. He says, "Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool happens to me also. So why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity." And so he begins to question now, even though perhaps it might be better to be wise than foolish. It might be better to walk in the light than in the darkness. There's something that happens to both the wise person and the fool. And so he begins to question, if we all reach the same end, then why have I sought to be so wise? What is the point of being wise if at the end of the day the wise person and the fool both die? And his conclusion in some subtle way is that while being wise may have its advantages, wisdom does not ultimately save us from dying. It doesn't keep our lives. And so he goes on to reflect by saying, "For the wise as of the fool there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity, a striving after the wind." Now, we've heard those words many, many times before already in what the teacher has to say. And his conclusion is not a new one at this point. He says, listen, there's no endurance, there's no remembrance of people, right? The lasting impact and effect of our lives doesn't track too far. And eventually we are all going to be forgotten and erased by time and by death. This was his discovery in chapter 1 when he reflected reflected on his life in light of the natural world, that he will die and will not be remembered, but the mountains will still be there and the rivers will still run to the sea. All of those things will continue to function beyond our lives under the sun here on earth. And so he wrestles with that, and he discovers that death is the great equalizer for everybody. No matter how we lived, what is it that really is gained in the end? Because death cancels it all out. And so he says, when I thought of all of that, I realized it's vanity. It's like fog and smoke and mist and vapor. It's a chasing after the wind, always chasing and never catching. And he says, I began to actually hate life. I began to despair about life. I began to sink into a depression about life. And get this, the reason is because of death. It's because of death that I begin to despair and hate life. He realizes that everyone and everything will eventually be taken from him. In fact, I had a friend a long time ago where we had a conversation about love and how great love is, and loving someone is part of the fulfillment we find in life, and the ability to love somebody else, and it brings so much joy and happiness. And yet, in the end, death steals it away. Again, a bit of a downer of a conversation, but his conclusion was that love is eventually stolen by death. And so the teacher says, death actually became the thing that caused me to hate my own life. It's depressive, it's despair, it's sad that this is the place that he finds himself in. And so if it's not remembrance and being remembered that brings meaning, purpose, and significance, if it's not our knowledge or our wisdom and our ability to accumulate that, if that only increases sorrow, if wealth and pleasure don't do it, if they have nothing to be gained beyond the immediate pleasure that it provides, maybe, he says, work itself could be a source of meaning, purpose, and significance. Maybe it's the work itself that I give myself to that will bring a lasting effect, or at least some sort of meaning, purpose, and significance in life under the sun. And so he throws himself into all the work that he could do, but then in the end he concludes in verse 18, I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool, yet he will be master of all for which I have toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity, smoke, fog, mist. It's like we reach out to grab it and it just slips through our fingers. For him, what he discovered is that work actually became a grind. Work was something that he toiled after, that he began to lose pleasure in. And he gives a reason for it. And he says, look, at the end of the day, when I'm actually done my work, the work that I've done and have accumulated will actually be passed on or left to someone else. And that person will inherit or receive everything that I've given my life for. And they have not worked for it. They didn't put in the blood, sweat, and tears. They will just slide into a space in which they will begin to manage and look after and continue to build on what I have already succeeded in accomplishing. It will just be given to someone else. And that person, they may not even deserve to receive it, but they will. And who knows? Who knows whether they will be responsible with everything I've worked for to accomplish and to build? Who knows whether they will just simply destroy it all in their own foolishness? Or maybe worse, maybe they'll change everything that I did or accomplished in my life. And so he goes on then to conclude thus. He says, "So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over the toil of all my labors under the sun, because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil." And so he says, look, it's a great evil that I would work so hard for so much of my life to achieve and accomplish and earn great gain in something, only to have it handed off to someone else who knows what they will do with it. And that is a great, he says, evil, which can also mean a great misfortune or great disaster or great harm or great trouble. It troubles him that might be the case. Now, on some small level, I think we understand this. In fact, I have a friend whose sister lives in another place away from their parents. And one time she came up to visit, and their parents were getting older, and although they still lived at home and, were still, fully capable of looking after themselves, but she came up to visit, and, she was thinking about kind of the future and what would happen. And one of the things that this guy's sister did is while she was visiting her parents, she took some tags and she wrote her name on the tags, and she began taking these little tags and stickers off, and she would go around the house and she'd stick them on the bottom of all the things that she wanted to inherit when her parents passed away. And so eventually the house was full of all these items with these little tags on them, unbeknownst to her parents at the moment, but all these tags were on the things. And so this was her way of saying, I've got first dibs on this item when you're no longer here. The thing you worked so hard to have in your life is what I want. And that was the view she was taking on the life of her aging parents. So in some small way, all that they were working for was only going to be taken by somebody else. Now you think about this maybe in a broader or a wider context of, again, your work, right? Who's going to take over your responsibilities when you are done? When you think about succession plans and who will follow after, whether that succession comes as a result of somebody's forced retirement or forced out of their position for one reason or another, or they gave up or they quit, or whatever the reason for the transition, somebody else will follow. And the question about succession is an important one. It's the conversations that's had in businesses and industries and churches and all over the place for many, many years. Like, what will happen when that person is no longer here? Who will take over? Who will be responsible? And you think about succession, and when you think about pastors in churches, when a pastor, retires, or when a pastor moves to a different church setting, the person who comes after, what will they be like, and what will they do, and how will they serve, and what will be the changes that they will feel are important to make. When you think about business partners who have managed a firm for so long, and one of those partners retires, or something tragic happens to them, what will the new person who steps into that role be like? What will that partnership require? What changes will need to be made? Will things simply carry on well, or will there be significant shifts in the direction of an organization because of that? When you think about even management and skill sets that come with managing, some managers do a fantastic job and others not so well, and yet they have that position. And so what will happen when the new manager comes? There's great fear oftentimes in corporations or businesses when the new boss comes in, because what will they be like? What demands will they have? What will be the things that they will require of us that maybe the last person didn't? Or you think about somebody who excels in professional sports. When is it their moment to exit? When is the right time for them to retire? Will they be forced out by injury? Will they stay too long? Will they quit too early? Those are all the kinds of questions that come up when you talk about succession and work and who will follow for whatever their circumstances are. And the person who slides again into that role, who steps into the position, whether it's the new quarterback or the new partner or the new pastor or the new manager or the new whoever it may be, the question is, they are inheriting, the reality is that they are inheriting something that they didn't necessarily put all the struggle into, that they didn't work for, that they didn't actually build it. And yet, it will be given to them. And that's really the point of the teacher as he thinks about his own exit. And then he says this, what has a man, verse 22, what has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? In other words, what is gained? What advantage is there? This is, again, a constant question. What advantage is there for all the work that somebody does? With all the successes, with all the accomplishments, with all the benefits? He says, what does a person have? What does a person have or gain from all the work in which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest, and this also is vanity. Because all the success will be followed by succession, and succession will eventually remove you from all the benefit of the work that you did. And death will cancel out any profit that you ever gained, because here's the reality, and we all know this to be true, but you can't take any of it with you when you're gone. And so what gain is there? And so he concludes that, look, work is a vexation. The work itself can actually bring grief and worry and trouble and affliction. And even the heart does not rest. Even at night when you're trying to sleep, you get up and you pace the floor because there's anxieties and stresses and worries on your mind about employees or about bottom lines or profit margins or relationships or the future direction of the building project or all of the things that the interpersonal conflicts, those things keep us up at night, and the person does not rest. Why? The thing is that work is always with them. When you're responsible, you carry it with you always. And it seems like, whether it's in the day-to-day grind, whether it's in the sleepless nights, that there is no finish line. And so what we see in our culture right now is that's in part induced by the pandemic is something that is being called the Great Resignation or the Big Quit. If you've ever heard of that, it's this large exodus that's happening from the workplace. Now, there's all kinds of reasons why this is true and all kinds of things that feed into that. But one of the consistent, or some of the consistent themes we see in people who have resigned from their positions or quit their jobs in the midst of the pandemic is that there is such heightened stress around their work that they just need to walk away from it all because the stress is just so much. Or maybe the pay is just not worth the stress. Or maybe the manager is overbearing or too much, is just too much for the circumstance and they don't like their manager or they don't like the direction of the company and so they're just out. They just flake out. We're done. We're dropping the ball. We are no longer giving our lives to this thing because of any of those reasons. And one of the things that's happened with the pandemic in a lot of industries is this shift in work. There's a shift in habits toward remote work and working from home, and so that's become a big thing. And companies are struggling to kind of pull that back together and moving back to the workplace. And there's a lot of hybrid models happening. I mean, there's significant shifts and disruptions in even the workplace because of what the pandemic has induced in our society. But for a lot of people, just on a personal level, there has been a forced reckoning about what really matters and what is it I really want to give my life to, especially as it relates to my work, and especially as it relates to what I'm gaining in life under the sun. And is what I'm presently doing actually the thing I want to give the rest of my life to? And so people are very much unhappy. Now, the Great Resignation is also leading to what some are calling the Great Reshuffle. And so people are leaving one industry for another. They're leaving one workplace for another. They're just moving around because people still need to work. It's just they're looking for better opportunities where there's better pay or a better manager, or there can be greater flexibility in their workflow. And so there's hybrid work, and they're looking for new companies and new opportunities or places with a conscience or whatever it might be. There's this great reshuffling happening within so many industries. And it really comes back down to this question of what is it that we are gaining from all the work that we do under the sun? It is an age-old question that still nags at our hearts and our brains today. And the thing is about work is, in the end, it does bring its share of struggle and pain, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't find enjoyment in our work. I mean, there's lots of things probably about your work and mine that we look at and go, man, I so love that I get to be able to do this. I'm so glad I get to walk in the door, and that's what I do with my week. In fact, the teacher even says here in verses 24 and 25 of chapter 2, he says, there is nothing better for a person that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his work. This also I saw is from the hand of God, for apart from him, who can eat or have any enjoyment? In other words, it is a gift from God to enjoy your work. Even in the midst of the share of struggle and pain it might bring, it is a gift of God if you can enjoy your work. And so it makes me wonder then, if maybe our approach to work should be maybe a little bit different. Because I think for so many people, we seek to find meaning and purpose and significance in the work that we do, when maybe what we should be doing is trying to bring meaning and purpose and significance to the work that we do. Instead of trying to find it in our work, maybe the meaning, purpose, and significance are the things that we bring to our work. And what if your work actually served a greater purpose? You see, because work is not all that bad. You see, in the scriptures, we have from the very beginning this command of God to actually work. In Genesis chapter 1 and 2, what we discover is that before the fall, before sin entered the world, when God called everything good, he actually gave Adam and Eve a job to do. Work was actually part of the creation mandate, and it was all good. Human beings were given responsibility for caring for tending the garden, or in some ways the national park, the large park that God had placed them in. And so there was work to be done in caring for that creation in the space that God had given them. They were to do everything that was required of them in order to maintain and keep it well, and to, all the work that needed to be done in the garden. And so work was part of that creation mandate. But what we discover and what happened in the fall when sin entered the world through the disobedience of Adam and Eve is that the work itself changed. Part of the curse that we read about in Genesis 3 is the fallout of sin's effect on this world. In fact, the Apostle Paul will say in Romans 8 that the world is suffering under its bondage to sin. And so there's part of even the natural world that is suffering under the curse of sin. And in fact, this is what we read in Genesis chapter 3, where God says to Adam, because of what has happened, he says that there will be thorns that will now be produced on the earth, and it's only by the sweat of your brow and the pain of hard work and harvesting and planting that you will find your food. And so after the fall and after sin's effect and the curse of sin on this world, what we discover is there was pain and difficulty that came in the actual work we do. Now, it's amazing to me when you stop and think about it, that as human beings, we go to such great lengths to reverse the effect of the curse of sin. When you think about farming, just as an example, right? We no longer, at least in parts of the Western world, the way that we do farming is very different from how it was done years and years and years ago, right? Most farmers I know aren't out there, with a pair of oxen and, they're kind of rolling along behind, walking and plowing their fields. No, we've got whole farming industries built with tractors and massive machinery and equipment that helps plant and, even water and harvest and all of the rest. Right? You can sit in your air-conditioned tractor listening to the music from your phone and your Bluetooth speakers in the middle of a hot summer day, staying cool, doing all that hard work. The sweat of the brow is reduced because we've worked so hard at not having to work so hard. Do you think about the fishing industry and things that have changed and the rigging on boats? I mean, a lot of that and those improvements are for what? To help reduce the amount of labor that happens. I'm not saying fishermen and farmers don't work hard. That's not what I'm saying at all, but we have done our best, right? Our best efforts to try to take some of the load off of what that work looks like. Think about other industries, computers, right? We use them in order to save us a lot of work. And that's what we've tried to do in order to relieve the effects of the curse of sin. But the reality is that we can't relieve the curse itself. We're unable to do that work. Only Jesus can do that. And he has removed the power and consequence of sin on our lives and our souls through his death and resurrection, that we might be forgiven and set free and welcomed into the kingdom of the Son that he loves, that he has promised, that God has promised that one day he will complete it when Jesus returns, that there will be an eternal kingdom in which there is no more mourning or crying or pain. It's a reverse of the effects of the curse. It's a reverse of the curse itself that only comes through Jesus. And so what about the here and now? I mean, if we believe him and we follow him and we trust him for that better day, for that future that he's promised, if Jesus has accomplished what is necessary for us to be welcomed into that reality, then what of our work now? Well, again, I think there's so much about our work that we can bring meaning and purpose and significance to. I mean, the work that we do can be for the benefit of other people. I mean, if we roll into work only seeking to build our own empire, however big or small that might scale in comparison to others, if that's the purpose of our work, then I think what we'll discover is that in the end it becomes a vapor, a mist, a fog that will just eventually be handed on to someone else. But if we bring meaning and purpose and significance to our work, that it benefits others, that it's for the good of our neighbor, if we do those things in that right way, I think we begin to discover a greater meaning, purpose, and significance. But again, as has been all along, if we're going to find true meaning, lasting purpose and value and significance, if our life is not simply going to be a vapor or a mist or a fog, if there's going to be of any eternal value to it, we've got to look above the sun. And that's exactly what Jesus tells us to do in Matthew chapter 6, verse 19. He says this, he says, "Don't lay up for yourselves treasure on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal." And he's not saying don't be responsible with money or don't worry about any of those things, or don't kind of be don't kind of just let those things slide. But those shouldn't be the primary purpose and concern of your life. He says don't work for, don't kind of strive after building your kingdom, laying up treasures on earth, because here's what can happen. It can rust, it can get destroyed, it can be stolen away from you in a moment's notice. And it can be given to someone else, or it can be lost in some unfortunate thing that happens of a market crash or something else. He says, so don't be, working so hard at storing up treasure on earth, because at the end of the day, it's all going to disappear. So what should we do? He says in verse 20, "But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroy, and where thieves don't break in and steal." In other words, treasure up, treasure in above the sun is his point. Work for things that aren't just of temporary value, but that are of eternal value. Work for things that will outlast your time here on earth. Work for things that can't be taken away. And he's speaking of the faith and the good works that flow out of our lives that echo into eternity. Work for things that don't spoil, that don't fade, that have a lasting impact. And he reminds us in thinking through that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Because the thing that you chase down and the thing that you chase after, what your heart is going to desire, is the thing you've invested in most. And so enjoy your work. Enjoy the work that you do in your career, or in the project that you're a part of, or the position that you hold, or the responsibilities you carry. There is so much to be enjoyed, and that is a gift from God. But at the end of the day, what we ultimately must be striving for is not to build our own empire, not to build our own kingdom, but to work toward a kingdom that's bigger, greater, better than, and far outlasts our life under the sun.